Hello everyone, this is Metal Warrior with Metal Warrior's Metal Madness. Today I'm going to review an album called The Bliss by a band called Room 1985. As a fan of the burgeoning synthwave movement, and especially artists like Carpenter Brute and VHS Glitch, among others, it was an honor that I got the opportunity to review a band that is proposed to kind of mix a few different divergent styles that were among my favorites: synthwave, metal, and prog. Room 1985 are a band doing such a thing, and I see this as a sign of the future and a way of music that is becoming more prominent. If anyone doesn't know what synthwave is, it's kind of hard to describe, but it's a mix of varying styles of such artists like John Carpenter's soundtrack music, Tangerine Dream, tons of synth pop, even some metal stuff is in there too, like just kind of the darker worldview. Jan Hammer's work with Miami Vice, and there's this sci-fi element amongst it too. It's a mixing of retro styles intended to often draw a dystopian Blade Runner-like future, but if it all took place in the 80s. I find it way more interesting and entertaining than many of the other popular modern forms of electronic music like dubstep, which is overly saturated at this point. So Room 1985, of course, owing to this movement but mixing it with other styles of music, almost reminds me of when bands such as Porcupine Tree and, I'll get to this in a minute, the Manchester bands in the late 80s through mid-90s were mixing acid house beats with their rock and progressive rock. Gunship is another such band mixing more organic sounds with the modern synthwave sound, garnering crossover appeal in the process. And then there's also LeBrock, which obviously was named after the actress Kelly LeBrock. And they mix kind of an AOR style with the synthwave music as well. So this album by Room 1985, The Bliss, starts out with a industrial-like intro before going into the Bliss. A decent first song, if unremarkable. It's with the second song that propels the album forward much more. A slurred-sounding Eastern-style sample incorporates itself with trance-like instrumentation and a better vocal performance and more heavy guitars. It is then clearly obvious that the album is a concept one, speaking of the dangers of social media and the often strange world we now inhabit. By the third proper non-intro song, I was left with an impression that bands like Room 1985 are actually closer to bands that mix electronica and rock in the 90s. And that's not really a knock or a slight on it if it's done right. I also felt that way listening to LeBrock's EP that they recently released. And I will acknowledge that mixing vocals within an often exclusively instrumental music like synthwave is a tricky venture. So it could be often a hit or miss. Yes, Room 1985 seems, even if unconsciously, to recall the traditions of bands from their hometown. It's known as the Manchester movement because it's Manchester. They call it Manchester. So there was like bands such as the Stone Roses or Inspiral Carpets, and they were kind of putting some house type of stuff with psychedelia and modern rock. And I wouldn't say that they necessarily sound like that, but they definitely invoke the spirit of that movement in some ways. So the song Ishtar follows, and I preferred this song for the first time to the previous two. It has heavy guitars and a kind of David Gilmour-esque guitar delay swells as well as the crashing cymbals, making an excellent track. As for bands mixing these different styles of music, I will say that I slightly prefer bands like Meteor or LeBrock, but I do see the promise that Room 1985 has in store. And then the song Snowy White features a vocal line that mixes 80s melodies with kind of, I would almost say, 90s style angst. A catchy song, if a little bit hammy at times. The Arrival tricks you with its kind of almost like a gent sounding riff, but thankfully evolves into a cool synth wash and better riffage ensues. I do like that song. And, you know, a little bit of Gent sometimes is not bad. I'm not overall a fan of Gent other than like the creators of it. I like Meshuggah and a few other bands. But anyways, that's just the only time on the whole album that anything even closely sounding like that happens. And it's kind of cool that they do decide to have such an eclectic palette to derive from. So, and I'd say that song is probably the best for the different atmospheres and the feelings that it shifts through. And then some of the vocals, I would say, like it almost has like a operatic female vocal that remind me for some reason of Nightwish, and it's a bit overtly placed in the mix. It's a cool song, and I would say it would be a good single or a way to demonstrate what Room 1985 is all about. Things I really liked. Well, I really dug the synths and the synth solos. I dug many of the heavy guitars, but not all of them. I was mixed on the vocals at times. I thought the vocals were done very professionally and well, just that some of the vocal lines could mix better with the music and just create a more dramatic result. The production, I would say, left a lot to be improved. I'd say, like a lot of modern albums, it seemed a little bit too compressed and dirty at times. And I know how hard, from my own experience, how hard it is to mix a lot of different tracks together. And I know a lot of bands today have that challenge because they want to be loud enough to, you know, kind of stand out in this market. But at the same time, a cleaner production might have been a little bit better on this type of album. And then, you know, with the cymbals kind of bleeding with the other instruments, when a more serene passage came through, it could be a distraction. So I dig what Room 1985 is attempting to do. I do feel that with some of these kinks worked out, they can be an awesome band in a growing movement that is kind of taking the world by storm. I mean, you look at the Stranger Things soundtrack and all these soundtracks coming out that are very influenced by synthwave, and there's more and more bands using actual vocals within the mix. And there's more bands like Meteor mixing metal or hard rock within the mix, and I think it's a growing trend. But thankfully, it's not an oversaturated trend. So Room 1985 definitely stands out because they are on the crux of something new that's happening in our musical landscape. And I think they have a lot of good ideas. They fall short in the production department, only slightly. And also, I'd say that some of the songs could have a more unified feel to them. I think there are disparate sounding bands. You know, listen to Mr. Bungle or listen to like any kind of band that has a lot of different stuff going on, and they make these different influences work. I'd say Room 1985 maybe should scale down a little bit in a certain way, because all those influences could work well, even, you know, put into one sound or being as disparate as they are. It's just they don't always make it work. Overall, I'd say it's good. I'd say if you're a synthwave fan, check it out. If you're a metal fan, I'd say take it, you know, keep an eye out in the future. I just felt like could have been a little bit better, but I'm going to definitely check it out and keep watching this band. That's all I got to say.